Ancient Egypt, they used to worship the god Osiris in a special festival that was found at Abydos. It's written all over the walls. This was the god of death, but if you look into the stories, mythologies, of course you get this idea of a god of rebirth, a god of grain, and many other things. Now this god of rebirth of Osiris was shown at a certain time of the year, and it's one of the mysteries that we have of this idea that the ancient Egyptians were heavily caught up in this idea of death and a death cult in a way, for they really seem to give more importance and so much glory to the idea of the afterlife and death. Really, the common people did not as much, and it's only reflected in these pharaohs and these pyramids and such that we get this idea. For all kinds of burials of people were shown tens of thousands of years ago in Caucasians of burying the dead with things for the afterlife. So one could see that they thought that those people deserved the stuff that went with them. Some of the earliest dynasties and pre-dynastic eras and kings of Egypt and Sumer, and probably other places too, would take their cohorts with them, and their consorts and things like that with them in the afterlife. And strangely, people were so caught up into this death cult, as you can even find some of these people today in a modern day have done, where they would agree to something like that because they believe because they're going with this person that they would be with them in the afterlife. And of course, he's got a free ticket here. You get a golden ticket to that situation. In fact, our current belief is that if you just believe, you all of a sudden get a golden ticket. Well, what's a golden ticket? Well, it has to do with the sun. For a lot of these things are sun-worshipping cults, and things have all derived out of that. That's the reason there's so much symbology, astrotheology, zodiacal terms, and so on. But this idea is carried on in many cultures. One of those mysteries or anomalies is the fact that it shows up at the exact same time, and it's the same kind of God that would do such. So even in ways that it was hidden, it shows that it still has connections back to the idea of a sun god. And at this festival that they had in Abydos, they would lead with this huge procession. But people that could afford it, farmers, and especially farmers along the way, would set up little small temples like you see over here on the left, or different type of edifices to give praise. One would think of this as like giving gifts or so on. It's a famous written down one where representatives of 3 kings came to do so. That's something else, though, I'll get into here shortly. But they led this procession off into the desert. Why would they do so? Well, there's a few reasons. West is the time of death of the sun, and now it goes down every day. In fact, that's what Desheret means, and that's where we get the word desert from. But also Horus, who's attached to this symbolically through, and we'll get into that in a minute, died supposedly in the desert because of a scorpion sting. This also has to do with the zodiacal connection too, and we'll brush upon that here shortly also as we get into this some more. But as they did this procession all along the way from Abydos down and through part of the Nile and then out towards the desert, it seems to have been actually headed towards an ancient wadi oasis that no longer existed. People have made the connections to. And that one time, whenever that oasis was drying up, there became a time where there was one tree, and everybody tried to keep that one tree to where everybody would ensure that it kept going, and in fact would take and plant its offspring next to it in the edge of where the water would be left in the oasis, in the hopes of rains. The natural water table would pull up and make a growth in that oasis and keep it going. But people haven't actually found that spot, and of course that tree would have been long gone, and that makes a connection to how Osiris was found in a tree, if you know the story. Had washed down the Nile, kind of done a Moses thing I talked about in a recent video, but also ended up in a tree in Lebanon, which makes connections to the ancient cedars that made everything work in a time where Egypt had used up all their trees. For it used to be a lot greener than it was, but that's in a lot of other videos too. So they leave the Temple of Osiris and they would make a great trek out across the desert. Now, they didn't have camels in Egypt at that time, although you think of it in iconography of such. That comes from Bactrian area, which is just south of the area that the people were domesticating horses and so many creatures that we have today, including that camel, which originally came from North America too. Got a video about that in a separate thing, and man, seeing this temple here and knowing that it was 80% covered up with sand whenever they first dug this thing back out, whenever you look past this caravan that's going here and you see that big whomp of sand that looks a little odd in the distance, I can't help but think, wonder what's up under that mound right there. And if we started to go out into the desert, what we might find that was old archaic sites for archaeology to go into too. But how would you know other than having some ground penetrating radar that they hooked up to a plane or a helicopter or something and flying along and trying to penetrate through all the sand? Might be able to work out something like that, work the squelch out and so on, and see if they could find something like that. But it'd have to probably be, perfected by trying to do such. And there are places in Egypt you could easily do it. Places they even know that you can go over now, and they found in satellite images, so you could go over that and see if it images it correctly. I seem to be drifting off in left field. Let's take it back here to this Osiris, of the earliest of gods, here coming in, and found on the walls here in a few different places. There are symbologies that hook up all with this: the red, white, blue crown, all kinds of ceremonies, stele, and so on. And you can see the Jed pillar we talked about recently, and how this procession would be taken out in the desert. They're not sure exactly what happened out there. I'm sure it probably had a lot more to do with that tree and a lot of other things that are really probably never going to be known. But the secret here is it equates to the time of our Christmas at December 21st, because there becomes a time whenever during that temple the sun ends up coming out down the long procession way that's shown there, Had a symbology with lambs too, or Aries, or the ram, that's also shown down that procession way, and the ones connecting it, which are extremely long connectives of a sphinx type that's connected with that. And everybody says that, well, that connects with Khnum. Well, yes, and Horus did too. There's a connective where all of this really connects together, and even though they say the sun dies and so on, most of these things that we look at are supposed to be a cycle. It's kind of something that happens every day, every year, every zodiacal age, and every great year, which is a full procession on the whole spin around back to point one again, which apparently the Caucasian part of humanity here has been paying attention to for at least 3.5 cycles. I've shown connections to that concept a few times. Strangely enough, there are other people that connect and say, well, they were supposed to have over 230,000 years, and the Ur of the Chaldees and all of this had been astronomers from the Wayback Machine. Not to get off in left field here, but this idea of Christmas on December 25th, let's take the idea of Christmas out of it just for a second if you can mentally. I know you won't be able to, but give it a shot. For what we're looking at here is something that goes along with Christmas and New Year's all of a sudden at one time here, and that's a festival. They're only like a week apart, and it's set aside for that. Because what we have here is the sun reaching its lowest point in the sky in an arch, like these little fireworks going across here, instead of being straight above us. This happens in the northern hemisphere. People looking into this about Osiris have said there's only one way that they would have had this, because their river flows at a different time, is that having it from the before time, and it must have been those people who heralded civilization down into there, who brought the cattle and grains and so on. And so it dates back much earlier than we even think of now, and it was written down first as this type of myth, which has a connection to the idea in Greek myths too, and others that show you that there was this civilization before, but that was left behind for this new thing. Now pantheons changed, the Titans and all of those situations we've talked about so many times, but the sun goes lower and lower in the sky, 1 degree per day, or we get that from the Sumerians, and a 360 degree ball, by the way, and 365 degrees or days to the year. Their belief was before that great catastrophe happened, which we connect to the Younger Dryas event, somehow we were at 360 days. That would have been if everything was just as perfect as it should be. Because every single other number all hooks up correctly. Not to go off in left field about that, but as it goes through the sky from the top and slowly gets lower and lower as it's going through the day, something that you could notice if you were getting towards the Arctic Circle, that man, the sun's way down over there. Around December 21st, it seems to sit still for 3 days. It doesn't rise or lower because we are kind of on an axis and a wobble. And then it starts to rise again instead of going any lower. And it saves all of humanity. Well, who was this connected to in ancient times? Well, way before the time that we connect it to now in a modern day. December 21st and the 3-day wane, making December 25th. The rebirth was Mithras of the Persians, Shamash of the sun of the Sumerians, Anu himself, or An, Osiris, And by proxy, of course, Horus, that works in the cycle situation, which we'll talk about more in just a second. Hercules and his 12 labors, which are the 12 signs of the zodiac and the 12 months of the year. Bacchus, Adonis, and in your Bible, God is known as Adonai. In fact, they say if you don't say his name, you say that. Both those have a common origin too that I've shown in other videos. Jupiter is said also to have been around this time, who is Dios Pater and the day father, and the sun worship and a day father in sky, and the situation going on with agriculture way back with machine, one could realize that also connects to sun worship and sun gods. And at night time would have been the planet Jupiter. Nimrod and his fame, Tammuz. And really a lot comes from that, for he was born out of an evergreen tree every year on December 21st through 25th in a celebration. And even in your Bible, they tell you an idea that's paganistic, but that they would take a tree inside and keep it, nail it to the floor so it doesn't wobble around or do anything, or put it in a pot, and then decorate it all upon it and put a star on top. And on that special day, they would select a tree out in a grove, much like you see in a lot of the cartoons and movies of old, looking like this here, where everybody would come out to, but they would also give sacrifice to the God that made everything happen. And then at home, they would have gifts. This, through the surgence of time, ends up coming into the 12 days of Christmas that we know of, for they're on the old lunar calendar versus regular calendar like we use today. In the solar sun calendar has a 11-day difference, and really if you go to the next day, which would become the new year, that's 12 days, and that's Saturnalia, for they had a festival around there, and so it connects to Saturn also. Those and other sun gods were celebrated and supposedly born or reborn on December 21st, 5th, or 21st would die, and then reborn 3 days later, and that, of course, is the sun hookup. Or you would find that on Easter, which is when the amount of light of day overtakes the death of winter and its long nights to save us all again, where we go through the summer. So here's another concept to give here on this, is whenever you would think of something along the lines of a sun god worship and how people may wane and fall from God, or this fall of man type thing that they think of, it can happen in a day, in a year. Let's look at the year, for when we reach past that spring point that we were talking about, everything starts flourishing. And this is when Inanna comes back, and the idea of spring and Venus and this whole concept of rebirth, it comes back, and it has a tale of Tammuz that goes with it too, just like a Jesus and Easter, which Istar has a lot to do with that. And the sun rises in the east, and Easter, Sirius rising in the east. There's a lot of these gods that are connected with this time. And one way to look at it is, when we're talking about sun worship, is the fact that, well, let's look at Egypt here, since we're focusing on it with Osiris. Egypt is quite often a little chilly at night. Desert gets chilly at night, and now that the nothing is taken over with the desert, it gets more chilly nights, doesn't hold its temperatures well. So you might think it's slightly chilly in the mornings, especially not in the sunlight. Drastic point feeling whether you're in the wind or not, and whether you're in a shadow or not. But as the sun rises up, it's going to get a lot warmer, and eventually start to get hot, and you might even start to curse the day. and it's heat that goes on through, and oh, and it's putting you through something. And then towards the later part of the day and evening, like these people in this picture, you start to worship it more in a concept because you don't want it to go away. And at the very end, you probably beckon it to go away and come back real quick, where then you'd have to flip around and watch it come up in the east. And it's why certain people prayed to the east and so on like that. So in a day, you could find somebody with the heat of some area like this, or farmers and all that type thing. Well, it's crisp in the morning, the evening ain't too bad, but man, that afternoon in August in Texas is hellish. It's actually hotter there than in Egypt, or hotter here than in Egypt. We could look at this also as a man's life, which at an average of 72 years is actually just one spoke going along in that great year of 72 years, times its precession all the way around the zodiac, so you only get to live in one piece of an age of man, which now we're in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the time of water. And instead of praising it, people are all worried about it and trying to make you worry about it. I think it's just odd. But during your life, you're a kid. I'll use myself as example. I grew up all over different places, my dad being in the service and we hopping around in places, but we ended up settling out in Texas here, and it was a little more summer and a better and longer summer than we ever experienced, and every year it was great with it. Seemed to start a little earlier, though you didn't have the winters that we did up north, whether it was Nebraska or places farther north than that, which still have snow every year. We didn't seem to get it every year, but I remember all but a couple of years us getting snow when we were kids, and it doesn't seem like we're getting it as much. But if you look at over time, that goes through little cycles too. But so looking through this in a kid's lenses of a man that matured and grew and now is coming of deep age here, in a way, a lot of people during their childhood are loving playing in the sun and the idea of God, almost like he's Santa Claus. In fact, that comes from saints. And this clause they get you into, and this idea, but you revel in it like a child in springtime, a child in summer. It doesn't matter at all. Your parents are kind of avoiding the sun some days or whatever, but you're out there just having it up. If you get a little sunburn, that feels weird for a day or two, but you're back at it, and man, I got a good tan now. And eventually over the summer, I used to get hellish tans. We used to skateboard all summer long and really pretty much wear Vans deck shoes, shorts, and a necklace. So your hair would get a lot lighter and stuff, but also you'd get very dark and tanned. But as I got older, started having to work out in it, framing houses and all these things, you're like, yeah, couldn't you be 95 instead of 105? With an index of 113, or get 113 with an index of 125 it went through in the 80s. Of course, that got followed by the worst winter that we had ever. No one wants to look back at that. Depends on which way they want to look at it, doesn't it? But as people get older, in the older time of life, they all of a sudden start loving sunsets. And even though they might have cursed God in the middle part of their life, they start to try to find him again in their later part of their life. And in doing so, they praise Osiris into the grave and flip around for another generation, and it comes up behind again. And you can see somebody doing that during their lifetime. Because of sun worship and because of the sun. If you follow what I'm putting out. So this death of winter concept goes along with it because of the growth that comes after it in the springtime. But no matter what, the springtime happens on the 21st of March, and then in the middle of summer on the 21st, here it goes again. It's all the 21st of each one, including Christmas, but there's that 3-day pause. Christ was in the tomb for 3 days. Hopefully in some of this you caught some similarities to the idea in this praise situation that goes on here, and how much there's connectives to it. But if you were to take some tidbits and connectives out of all the people I mentioned earlier, with Mithra, Shamash, Shanu, Tammuz, Nimrod, Jupiter, Adonis, Bacchus, the idea of Hercules, you can get a lot more. Horus actually raised from the dead somebody named Asar. Now you get that down in a story that's not found in the Old Testament. It says the new one. And Jesus raised up a man named Lazarus, who, by the fact that they leave out the vowels, was El Azur. And they put the Greek us on the end of it because they were in the writing of the Bible and so on too, with a lot of these names. And not just in the Bible, but in reality. It's all Greek. Or at least a lot of the names we've adopted are the ones that they had. Hopefully I've made a few connectives here. Let's try to make a few more. Well, here's one of those things done 50-50 that's pretty much a photo of Jesus and a representation of Osiris and rebirth, symbols of life, and a cross. Strange how really what we're looking at, the difference of it's, one's a hippie with a mustache and a beard, but that's of course also adopted for different reasons with hair and knowledge back in the day, especially in the Greeks. You saw that they called everybody a barbarian that grew hair, so they would think of Jesus as being that. No. All of their wise people had hair like this. In fact, all the wizards that you can think of through time pretty much did, along with a pointy hat. I did a video on who the three kings really were, but the fact that somebody had found actually a document telling you that these three people, and one of the names there is supposed to have been said as one of the names of the people that were the three kings, and in their procession, and how they had bought a whole bunch of cannabis. But this is of course for the anointing oil. That was in a different video that I did. Of course the three kings came from the east. Well, the three kings there that you're looking at is the belt of Orion, or Arian, the hunter. It points directly at Sirius, which is the star in the east, and that connects with Osiris and the gods of rebirth and Isis. And where does it point at, though, whenever it's coming up in that twist? You see, because it kind of comes up every day, and then it twists and arch over like that. What's it pointing at? It's pointing at the sun. So when the three kings came, they pointed out to the star in Bethlehem that people are talking about. What are they talking about? What are they pointing at? What are they just, yeah, it's pointing at the sun. Jesus is the sun god. It's the reason he's kind of the Alpha and the Omega. See, because all this started from that crap. And then everybody got theirs all blown up with all kinds of things, and then they felt like they had to live behind these things, and they threw all that away and put it back to what it was, keeping some of the sacredness that was in it and the things they couldn't let go, and just turned it into nothing. Especially with everybody else not going that way. A lot of people say, they adopted the pagan, and it was everything. Whenever it came out, it was a pagan story in the first place. All of it. It's a pagan religion, just like the rest of them. Pagan just means agriculturist. And these people were the sun worshippers from way back when and knew the seasons and everything going on. That caused you to live in more northern climates and know what the hell's going on into it, but also set up for things. Like in those Aesop fables, and like in the way we look at as the grasshopper and the ants and that idea and how you're set up for things. Caucasians are kind of built that way. Setting up for something. And this is a rising of the sun that happens still at this time now. We're slowly floating through the zodiac, and of course Jesus heralded the declamation or difference between the time of Aries and the Lamb and Ram of God and fish. For you don't see him as a lamb symbology. Oh, they say lion lay with the lamb. That's zodiacal too. What you see him represented is with a fish. In fact, right off the bat, whenever he kicks it in, he shows you, no, I'm going to do this thing with fish at weddings. Fish, fish, fish. It's constantly shown afterwards. Osiris, Sirius. I'm serious. This 3 kings and a star of Bethlehem, and it was supposed to pointing over. A lot of people try, it was must have the aliens came down and they put Jesus, the alien baby, down here. Now, because there's only one way that there would be a beam of light that would let people know that it's right over a certain place. Well, no, it wasn't pointing at a certain place. It was pointing towards the sun that comes up and where that was going to happen and where there was going to be another sun god. They made it happen too. You're still caught up in it. Though I've lit a torch and trying to walk you through the mist here. You wouldn't believe it, but we're way past nighttime and in morning and coming up, and as soon as this mist burns off, you're going to realize we're in the daytime already. Yeah, we already made it through the long, dark night of this whole last, year and a half, 2 years that I've been talking about this type of thing, but I'm going to keep going back through it again, of course, and trying to show you this idea. You take a Christmas tree and you say, well, that's got nothing to do with the serpent and everything. Well, there's a story about it. Nana and the serpent wrapped around the tree, and it had to be killed off. It had to do with an eagle that was nested in it that ended up being one of the stars in heaven and used to be a zodiacal sign. And that's a star, and it's a symbol of heaven. But no, it's, you see, the sun is a star. So, what's this all wrapped around it? That's the snake. You're not supposed to eat off the tree. Well, some of those are fruit trees, and some of those are pot trees and opium poppies and all kinds of things going on. No, you're not supposed to till a certain point. Unless you're in great pain and all these other situations. But you're not supposed to eat at a tree too. If I make one of those oranges that's all stuck in with cloves and stuff and everything, you don't eat that. Thought it was weird when I was a kid. My mom laid out some nuts and things like that, and she goes, don't eat these. Why? Because Thursday's Thanksgiving, so I want them to be there Thanksgiving. You got any more of it? Yeah, I'm going to eat some of these. And we got more. Next thing you know, Dad comes home, he gives the nutcracker, we're going at it, and Mom's like, but she can fill it back up 3 times. Why would she do something like that? Nah, she was just presenting it to us early. Went and grabbed a whole lot of other things and mixed nuts and put it in there too, and had another bowl and everything whenever we... Never mind. So we've talked about Isis and her beginnings and origins here recently. Got a video about Io too that goes along with this concept and bringing cattle down and so on, and this connectives, and hopefully we can see this idea of Osiris. You see, because along with the concepts of that, they have virgin birth. Well, no, you read the story, it's not a virgin birth, and she put his body back together. This is his Ka statue. He's a shadow of his former self. That's simple. Anyhow, so she puts him all back together. Listen to the story careful next time when they tell you the only thing she couldn't find is his ding ding. She ends up doing a situation like this and transforming into a dove and alighting upon a gold phallic symbol that apparently replaced it, and then she became pregnant with Horus. So this was a virgin type birth. She became Mary, which is a symbol of water. We use the concept of maritime. Look, there's upside down hearts here. So there's about 10 or 12 connectives, and then a few people, and we talked about pretty much everybody involved in the Fertile Crescent and going to the Greeks and everything, and then arriving in through the Romans, and what the hell, in fact, things that we have today related to this concept. But it didn't start there. In fact, the reason that those people and all the other people of the Fertile Crescent has it, because of the spread of humanity that made that happen. They have some variation on a theme. Yes, that's the spice of life. Isn't that fantastic? For the spice trades and so on led people mingling with others and developing a separate little concept in each little place that was a little bit different. You look at each one, they have something special in their own right. You put it all together and it's something quite more special. I think of it now, after studying all this for so many years, as even more special than the story that we usually go upon at Christmas. And that it actually means so much more. There's so much to Christmas. I mean, happy holidays, people, because we just had Thanksgiving. We're going through that, and New Year's and so on. But Merry Christmas to you and yours. I hope you have a fantastic one this year. Seems like the world has adopted this along with pretty much everything else that was created by people derived from the different civilizations that they created here from before. We're still a product of that. We're only 2 zodiac zones away from the middle of the Egyptian dynasties and things happening in Aries in the time that came on with Mars, who also had a December 25th birthday, by the way. But if we go one more back before that, and Taurus and so on, we can see its origins and passing through time. And in a video, I'm going to do another one about Christmas here, if I can get it all together for y'all, showing you something that makes this not even look that old compared to other ones, and we'll attach it down to this, and I won't have to ramble so much about this because I will have already shown you a lot of it. Peace. Santa.